Sisa Mitetwa stood on the balcony of her mansion in Waterfall Estate, looking down at the manicured gardens that rolled out like a green carpet toward the far-off lights of Johannesburg. The city shimmered in the distance, cold, brilliant, unbothered like scattered diamonds against velvet night. Everything about Sisa's life was polished, curated, unquestionably successful. At 37, she was a partner at South Africa's leading consulting firm, the kind of woman whose name traveled ahead of her. 2 master's degrees, one from an Ivy League institution, another from a prestigious French school, a global network, a wardrobe that whispered money, a home that looked like it belonged in Architectural Digest. She could solve other people's problems for a living, and she did it so well that CEOs paid her to tell them what their own instincts were, too afraid to admit. But as she raised her glass of wine and watched her reflection faintly ripple in the balcony door, she felt the same ache she always felt when the noise of achievement faded. It wasn't loneliness exactly. It was absence. Her phone buzzed again, lighting up her hand. Another invitation, Tandi's daughter's 5th birthday. Another pastel balloon arch. Another smiling couple posing behind a cake with their names on it. Another milestone that belonged to someone else. Sisa smiled despite herself. She loved her friends' children. She was the warm auntie who remembered favorite colors and showed up with thoughtful gifts and stayed late to help clean up. She was the one who gave advice, who held hands, who quietly paid for extra cupcakes when someone's budget was tight. But as she added the birthday to her calendar, slotting it in among board meetings, flights, client dinners, strategy reviews, she couldn't ignore the truth she'd been outrunning for years. She was always the witness, never the bride, always the godmother, never the mother. She thought of all the moments she'd celebrated for others, how many baby showers she'd attended, how many friends she'd guided through marriage counseling and breakups, how many times she'd been the strong one. And then, like a seed finally choosing to grow, a thought settled into her chest with quiet certainty. She didn't need to wait anymore. She didn't need a man to become a mother. She had love, she had stability, she had resources. She had a home where a child could be safe and adored. Why should she keep postponing the life she wanted? Because she hadn't found a partner who could keep up with her pace? Or because her parents still believed a woman's life didn't truly begin until a man claimed it? That night, Sisa didn't sleep much. She stared at her ceiling, the city lights leaving faint stripes across the room, and she tried to talk herself out of it. But the thought didn't leave. It only got clearer. 3 weeks later, she sat across from Dr. Naidu at a sleek fertility clinic in Sandton. The waiting room smelled like expensive candles and controlled hope. The receptionist spoke softly, as if loud voices might scare the dreams away. Dr. Naidu explained the IVF process with the calm precision of someone who had watched miracles become routine. Anonymous donors, genetic screening, success rates, timelines, hormone injections. You'd make an excellent mother, Dr. Naidu said, closing her file. Her voice was warm, her eyes kind. Take some time to think about it, but from everything you've told me, you're more than ready. Sisa left the clinic with her heart pounding. For the first time in years, she felt something that wasn't ambition or stress or performance. She felt hope, raw, terrifying, exhilarating hope. That weekend, she drove to Durban North, the neighborhood of her childhood, where the houses were old money and the gossip was older. Her parents' home looked almost exactly the same. The cream walls, the framed family photos, the careful neatness that said, "We are respectable people." Her mother, Nomusa, greeted her with affection, but Sisa could see the question behind her smile. At 37 and unmarried, every visit home came with an invisible assessment. How close are you to fixing your life? Her brothers were there too, Mandla and Sipho with their wives and children, the house buzzing with laughter and chaos. Sisa watched her father, Bongani, bouncing her nephew on his knee, and the look on his face made something inside her tighten. That look, the look she'd waited for her entire life. She remembered being a girl in that same lounge, sitting straight, hair neatly plaited, report card in hand, hoping a perfect score would finally earn her that softness. But her father's pride for her sons was different, visceral, unguarded. When Mandla became a regional manager, Bongani threw a party. When Sipho bought a house, he cried. When Sisa became the youngest partner in her firm's history, Bongani nodded and said, "That's good. But when are you going to settle down?" Later, after dinner, after her brothers left with their families, Sisa sat with her parents in the living room. Her mother poured tea, the way she always did when she sensed emotional weather coming. Her father watched rugby highlights with the volume low. "Baba, Mama, I have something to tell you." Sisa's voice was steadier than her insides. "I've decided to have a child. Through IVF, I've chosen a donor, and I'm starting the process next month." Silence fell like a curtain. Nomusa's hand froze mid-pour. Bongani turned off the television slowly and looked at Sisa like she had spoken another language. "You want to have a child alone?" Nomusa asked finally, her voice tight. "Sisa, what about marriage? What about finding a husband first?" "I've been waiting for that, Mama. I'm 37. I have a good life. I have a stable home. I have more than enough money. I don't need to wait anymore." Bongani stood up, jaw clenched. "This is nonsense. You are embarrassing this family. What will people say? That my daughter couldn't find a man, so she went to some clinic? That she's raising a child with no father?" "The child will have a father," Sisa said. "A donor." "A stranger?" Bongani's voice rose, filling the room with anger that made Sisa's stomach twist. "You have disgraced everything we taught you. We raised you properly. We sent you to good schools. We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us?" Something cracked in Sisa's chest. "Gave me everything," she whispered. Then her voice strengthened with years of swallowed truth. "Baba, do you know how hard I've worked for your approval? I've achieved things Mandela and Sipho will never achieve. But you've never looked at me the way you look at them. Never. Because I'm a daughter, and in your eyes, my only real value is marrying well." "That is not true," Nomusa said quickly, but her eyes slid away. "It is true, Mama. I know it. I've always known it." Tears burned, but Sisa refused to let them fall in that room. "I'm doing this, with or without your blessing." Bongani turned his back as if she had physically insulted him. "Then do it without. Don't come crying to us when you realize your mistake." Sisa drove back to Johannesburg that night with her hands shaking on the steering wheel. The highway lights blurred into long white lines, and she had to pull over once because the sobs came too hard and too suddenly. She called her best friend, Zanele, who arrived at Waterfall with wine, tissues, and the kind of righteous fury only true friends could hold. "They don't deserve you," Zanele said, voice fierce. "We're your family now. You, me, Thandi, Lindiwe. We'll throw you the most beautiful baby shower. We'll be there for every scan, every moment. You're not alone." And they weren't. When the injections began, Zanele drove her to appointments. When the hormones made Sisa weepy and irritable and strange in her own skin, Thandi brought soup and watched movies with her, no questions asked. When the embryo transfer happened, Lindiwe filled her house with flowers and prayers, as if the walls themselves could become witnesses to hope. And when the pregnancy test came back positive, the 4 women screamed and cried and danced barefoot in Sisa's kitchen. Sisa was going to be a mother. At 12 weeks, Dr. Naidu called her in for a routine appointment. Sisa walked into the clinic already smiling, her hand resting over the small swell of her belly, as if she could protect the miracle with her palm. She was having a daughter. The scan had confirmed it. A little girl she would name Imani Faith. But when Dr. Naidu entered, her expression was professional, strained. "Sisa," she said gently, "there's been a situation, a breach in our donor database." Sisa's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "The donor you selected filed a request to remove his samples from our system, and in the process, it was discovered that you're pregnant with his biological child." Sisa's heart stopped. "But donors are supposed to be anonymous." "They are. This wasn't supposed to happen. But legally, we have to inform you." Sisa shook her head hard. "No, I don't want to know. I chose anonymous for a reason." "I understand," Dr. Naidu said softly. "But the donor's legal team has demanded disclosure." Dr. Naidu slid a file across the desk. "The donor is Zola Bengu." The name hit Sisa like ice water. "Zola Bengu? The Bengus from Durban North?" Dr. Naidu nodded. Sisa opened the file with trembling hands and stared at the photo. A younger Zola, handsome in an unpolished way, eyes dark and watchful. A face she remembered from neighborhood gatherings where he always stood slightly apart, as if he expected to be rejected before he even spoke. Zola Bengu, the black sheep, the disappointment, the Oxford dropout. The son people whispered wasn't even a real Bengu. The one who drifted from scheme to scheme, always on the edge of trouble. And now he was the father of her child. "I need to terminate," Sisa heard herself say. "I can still terminate." Dr. Naidu's face softened. "You can. But Sisa, you're having a healthy pregnancy, a daughter. Is this really what you want?" Sisa left the clinic in a daze and drove aimlessly through Sandton. The world outside her car looked normal, people walking, traffic moving, coffee shops full, but inside her, everything was spinning. She had planned this carefully. Anonymous donor. No emotional complications. No man to disappoint her or abandon her child. And now Zola Bengu was tied to her daughter forever. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Sisa Mtetwa?" The voice was male, deep, careful. "Who is this?" "It's Zola Bengu." Sisa's stomach dropped. "I think," he said quietly, "we need to talk." They met at a coffee shop in Rosebank, neutral territory, bright and public. Sisa arrived first, armored in a tailored pantsuit and boardroom composure. When Zola walked in, she barely recognized him. He was older now, filled out, stronger, locks pulled back, jeans and a black shirt. His face carried a seriousness that made him look less like a boy who made bad decisions, and more like a man who'd paid for every mistake with interest. He sat across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "I didn't know," Zola said finally. "I sold my sperm 2 years ago when I was desperate. I needed money for a business I was starting. I never thought." He stopped and rubbed his face. "My grandmother is furious. She says this will bring curses on our family." "Your grandmother?" Sisa gave a bitter laugh that didn't sound like her. Try my father. He already disowned me for choosing IVF. What do you think he'll do when he finds out it's you? Zola flinched. I know what people say about me. I'm the failure, the dropout, the one who couldn't make anything of himself. Are you still that person? Sisa asked, sharper than she intended. Zola met her eyes. There was pain there, and determination, and something else growth. No, he said. I'm not. I've spent the last 2 years building something real, a natural pharmaceutical company. I make healing tonics from traditional Zulu remedies my grandmother taught me. They help with blood pressure, inflammation, cholesterol. Real results, not schemes. He exhaled slowly. I'm making R1 million a month now. I know that's nothing compared to what you deal with, but the business is growing. Sisa studied him, looking for the reckless boy she remembered. But the man in front of her had calloused hands and conviction in his voice. What do you want from me? She asked, bracing herself. I want to be a father, Zola said simply. I know you didn't choose this. I know I'm not what you wanted. But that's my daughter you're carrying, and I'm not walking away from her the way my father walked away from me. Something in his honesty disarmed her. I need time, Sisa said. Take it, Zola replied, but I'm not going anywhere. Over the weeks that followed, time did something Sasha didn't expect. It softened her. Coffee turned into lunch, lunch into dinner. Conversations grew longer, deeper, less guarded. Zola told her about being raised as the outsider, the son his father barely acknowledged, the boy the family treated like a stain. He spoke of the whispers that he wasn't a real Bengu, as if blood could be revoked by gossip. His grandmother, he said, was the only one who loved him without condition. She taught him about herbs and healing, about plants that carried memory and medicine, about dignity even when the world insisted you didn't deserve it. Sisa found herself sharing things she'd never said out loud. The weight of being the eldest daughter in a Zulu family that measured worth through marriage. The loneliness of being excellent and still being treated like she wasn't complete. The ache of watching her brothers be praised for doing the bare minimum while she conquered the world in silence. We're the same, Zola said one evening at the Bryanston Organic Market, watching families stroll past with ease. We're the children our parents couldn't quite love enough. Sisa swallowed hard. I thought I was the only one who felt that way. You're not, Zola said. And our daughter? She's never going to feel that way, I promise you. Something unlocked in Sisa then, a door she had kept bolted shut for years. When Imani was born on a clear October morning, Sisa understood love with a force that rearranged her, not the conditional love of parents who wanted you to be someone else, not the transactional love of being valued for what you could do, but the fierce, uncomplicated love of a mother for her child. Zola was there for the birth. He held Sisa's hand through the contractions, wiping sweat from her forehead. When the nurse placed Imani in his arms, Zola cried openly, shoulders shaking, as if a lifetime of being unwanted was finally being rewritten in real time. He whispered promises in Zulu, his voice breaking. I will show up for you, he told her, every single day. You will never doubt that you are loved. And he did. The first year was chaos beautiful, exhausting chaos. Sisa had planned to hire excellent nannies and maintain her demanding career. She hadn't anticipated how motherhood would split her open, how it would make her both softer and stronger, how it would exhaust her in ways consulting never had. Zola showed up in ways that astonished her. He bought the house next door in Waterfall, and renovated it with quiet pride. He was there for 2 a.m., feedings, for colic and teething, for every milestone. While Sisa struggled to balance work and guilt and the ache of wanting to do everything perfectly, Zola moved through fatherhood with instinct, born from love and discipline. "You're a natural," Sisa told him one night as she watched him rock Imani to sleep. "My grandmother raised me," Zola said softly. "She taught me that loving a child is the most important work you'll ever do." Sisa's parents didn't meet their granddaughter for 6 months. When they finally visited, Bongani barely looked at Zola. Nomusa made pointed comments about children born out of wedlock. Sisa asked them to leave. The Bengus weren't any better. Zola's father refused to acknowledge Imani. The family that had always treated Zola like an outsider now had proof in flesh and blood of his disgrace. After one painful family gathering, Sisa found Zola standing alone outside, staring at the garden lights like he was holding himself together by force. "I'm sorry," Sisa whispered. "You're connected to me now, and it's making everything harder." Zola looked at her, eyes steady. "Sisa, you and Imani are the best things that ever happened to me. I don't care what they think." But Sisa cared. She cared more than she wanted to admit, because despite everything, she still craved her parents' approval. She still flinched at their disappointment like a reflex. And even as Zola proved himself day after day, she couldn't fully erase the old story people had written about him. So she did what she always did when she was afraid. She controlled. She kept him at arm's length. She insisted they were co-parents, not a couple. Zola didn't push, but his eyes held quiet hope whenever they were together, as if he believed she would eventually see what he saw. "Why don't you date him?" Zanele asked one day at a park as they watched Zola chase Imani around a jungle gym. "He's gorgeous, devoted, an incredible father. What more do you want?" "He's not," Sisa hesitated, hating how shallow she sounded. "He's not the kind of man I imagined." "You mean he's not the polished corporate type your parents would approve of?" Zanele's voice was blunt. "Sisa, when are you going to stop living for their approval and start living for yourself?" The words stung because they were true. Over the years, Zola built his empire. African Life Botanicals grew from a small operation into a major player in the wellness industry. Sisa couldn't help herself. She started advising him strategically, using her consulting expertise to help him scale. When he spoke about expanding to Europe, she connected him with contacts from her time in France. When he needed investment, she wrote him a check. "You don't have to do this," Zola said, staring at the paperwork. "I'm not doing it for you," Sisa replied, more defensive than she needed to be. "I'm doing it for Imani's future, and because it's a good business." Zola smiled like he heard the truth behind her lie. "Whatever you need to tell yourself." Getting EU certifications was massive. Brussels, Paris, Berlin. Meetings where executives underestimated Zola until he opened his mouth. Regulatory hurdles that made even Sisa's world of compliance look gentle. Sisa watched him hold his own, watched him evolve into a man who could walk into any room in the world and still sound like himself. "You're brilliant," she told him after he closed a distribution deal. "I've worked with Fortune 500 CEOs who couldn't do what you just did." "I had a good teacher," Zola said, eyes lingering on hers a second too long. By the time Imani was 5, the business was generating serious revenue. Zola hired teams, moved into proper offices, began appearing in business magazines. He was no longer a man people could dismiss, but Sisa still held back. She still introduced him as her daughter's father, not her partner. She still kept their relationship filed under co-parenting, even though they ate dinner together most nights, even though he knew her better than anyone, even though her friends had stopped being subtle. "What are you so afraid of?" Lindiwe asked after Imani's 6th birthday, where Zola had organized a princess-themed spectacle that made the children feel like royalty. "I'm not afraid." "You are. You're terrified of what your parents will think if you choose him. Terrified of what it means to actually let someone love you." Sisa opened her mouth to argue, but no words came, because it was true. She had spent her entire life trying to earn love through achievement, through perfection, through being useful. The idea of being loved simply because she existed, messy, uncertain, imperfect, felt impossible. The shift came when Imani was 7. Zola called Sisa into a meeting with his lawyers and accountants. African Life Botanicals had received a major acquisition offer from a European pharmaceutical company. The numbers were dizzying. "I'm not taking it," Zola said, "but I want to buy out your investment. You believed in me when no one else did. You deserve to see the return." He slid the documents across the table. The amount was staggering, more than triple her initial investment. "Zola?" Sisa stared. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said, voice quiet but firm. "And I need you to understand something. I'm not the man I was. I'm not the failure everyone said I'd be. I built this, I earned this, and I'm going to keep building." For the first time, Sisa truly saw him not as the boy from Durban North, not as the donor whose sperm she had accidentally chosen, not as the man her parents would roll their eyes at, but as Zola Bengu, principled, driven, disciplined, present, a father, a builder, a man who had turned pain into purpose. And suddenly, the truth hit her so hard it made her dizzy. She was in love with him. The realization terrified her, because loving Zola meant choosing herself over her parents' approval. It meant admitting everything she believed about the kind of men she should end up with was wrong. That night, after Imani was asleep, Sisa sat with Zanele in her kitchen. "I love him," she whispered, tasting the words like something forbidden and holy. "I'm in love with Zola." Zanele squeezed her hand. "I know. We've all known for years. The question is what you're going to do about it. What if he's moved on?" Sisa's voice trembled. "What if I waited too long?" "There's only one way to find out." The next evening, Sisa invited Zola over after Imani fell asleep. He arrived in a tailored suit, looking every bit the successful entrepreneur he had become. Yet when he smiled, she saw the same warmth that had been there from the beginning, the man who showed up. They sat on her balcony. The city lights spread beneath them like 1,000 witnesses. "I need to tell you something," Sisa began, voice shaking. "I've been unfair. For 7 years I kept you at a distance because I was afraid of what people would think, afraid of disappointing my parents, afraid of being vulnerable. But watching you grow and build and show up for our daughter every single day. Zola, you're the best man I've ever known." Zola was quiet, his face unreadable. "I've been in love with you for a long time," she continued, tears sliding down her cheeks. "And I've been too scared to admit it, too caught up in what I thought I should want instead of seeing what was right in front of me. If you'll have me if I haven't waited too long, I want to try, for real." Zola reached out, wiped her tears with his thumbs. "Sisa," he whispered, voice breaking, "I've been in love with you since the day you looked at me in that coffee shop, like I was the last person on earth you wanted to see. I've been waiting for you to get out of your own way. I would have waited forever. You shouldn't have to wait anymore, she said. He kissed her then, and it felt like coming home to a place she didn't know she'd been searching for. So we're doing this? Zola asked when they pulled apart. For real? For real, Sisa said. But I need you to teach me. I've never done this. I've never let anyone this close. We'll figure it out together, Zola said softly. That's what we do best. The next months taught Sisa vulnerability in ways no boardroom ever had. She learned how to let someone help her, how to be imperfect without apologizing for breathing, how to receive love without trying to earn it. They told Imani first. At 7, she understood enough, and her joy was explosive. Does this mean Daddy is going to live with us? She asked, bouncing like a spring. Would you like that? Sisa asked, head clenched with tenderness. Yes, I want us to be a real family. We've always been a real family, Zola said, pulling Imani into his lap. But yes, we're going to live together. Her friends cheered like it was a holiday. Thandi hugged Sisa so hard she nearly cried again, telling their parents was uglier. Bongani hung up the phone. Nomusa cried and said she needed time. The Bengas remained cold. But Sisa surprised herself. She didn't crumble the way she used to. She had spent 37 years chasing approval that always moved further away. Now, at 44, she was choosing her own life, choosing love, choosing the family she had built instead of the one she had been born into. Zola moved into the waterfall home, and for a while, their life felt like a miracle made ordinary. Mornings where they made breakfast together while Imani did homework at the counter. Saturdays at Imani's soccer games, cheering like proud teenagers. Evenings where Zola massaged Sisa's shoulders while she debriefed client stress, then kissed her forehead as if her mind deserved rest. Sisa became lighter, softer, happier. You're different, Zanele observed one afternoon as they watched Imani play. You look free. I am, Sisa said, almost surprised by her own words. I'm actually happy. You both deserve it, Zanele replied. And then just when the rhythm of their love began to settle into something stable, life introduced its twist like a knife through silk. Zola's business expanded further. The EU office became real, alive, African life. Botanicals wasn't just exporting, it was establishing itself. New partnerships, new markets, new visibility, magazine covers, interviews, invitations to speak at wellness summits. People began to call Zola a modern African success story. And the world, as if allergic to black success without a scandal, began to whisper. It started small, a tweet, a voice note, a friend of a friend who knows someone in customs. Then it spread. Breaking. African Life Botanicals linked to alleged trafficking ring. Sources claim wellness brand used as laundering front. Sisa saw the headline while making tea. The spoon froze mid-stir. Her chest tightened as if the air had thickened. She clicked. The article was written with that confident cruelty the internet loved, half insinuation, half performance. It used words like alleged while dripping certainty. It spoke of suspicious shipments, unusual cash flow, rapid EU expansion. No proof, just poison shaped like journalism. By lunchtime, radio hosts discussed it like entertainment. By evening, a camera crew lingered outside Waterfall's gates. And by night, the storm walked into their home. Zola came home late. Not panicked, Zola didn't easily panic, but contained, like a man holding the door shut against a hurricane. I need to talk to you before you hear it from anyone else, he said quietly. Sisa's voice came out thin. Tell me it's not true. Zola looked at her, really looked. Sisa, he said, voice low. You know me. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to throw herself into the evidence of the years, the diapers, the bedtime stories, the steady love. But fear is older than love. Fear was the first language Sisa learned in her childhood home. What's happening? She asked, and she heard the sharpness in her own tone, heard the shadow of her father in her voice. Zola flinched, not because the question was unfair, but because the tone was familiar, the tone of a world that always assumed he was guilty. Someone is trying to destroy me, Zola said. His name is Amadi. Who? Sisa asked. Zola's jaw tightened. An old friend. Something in his expression made Sisa's stomach drop. The words old friend didn't sound like friendship. From before? She pressed. From your old life? Zola's eyes hardened. I left that life. I went legit. I built this clean. But you knew criminals, Sisa said before she could stop herself. And the moment the words left her mouth, she hated herself. Zola stared at her like he was watching something sacred. Break. I knew poverty, he said, voice rising for the first time. I knew hunger. I knew what it felt like to be unwanted. Yes, I knew people who did dark things to survive. But I left. I chose another way. The pressure became real fast. Banks asked questions. Certain accounts were flagged pending verification. EU partners demanded explanations with legal language that tasted like distrust. Customs held shipments. Investors grew cold. Journalists hovered like vultures. Then Waterfall's gossip machine did what it always did, turned pain into entertainment. I always knew something was off. That new EU office, where did the money really come from? Poor Sisa. Imagine being dragged into that mess. Sisa wasn't dragged. She was terrified. Terrified of being embarrassed, of becoming a headline, of her father's voice saying, I told you so. And that terror did what it always did. It made her control. One evening, after a brutal television segment showed Zola's face while a presenter smiled and said, alleged laundering front, like it was already fact, Sisa turned to him in the kitchen, arms folded tight. What don't I know about you? She asked. Zola went still. You think I'm lying, he said. And it wasn't a question. Sisa swallowed. I think I've never been allowed to love without consequences. And now the consequences are here. It sounded like honesty, but it wasn't justice. Zola stepped closer, eyes intense. I built this business clean. I have audits, compliance, EU certifications that would not exist if there was even a hint. But you have a past, Sisa cut in, and her own words felt like betrayal in real time. Yes, Zola said, and something in him cracked. I have a past, and you knew that when you told me you loved me. Silence swallowed the room. Sisa's heart pounded. Fear screamed louder than memory. I need you to move out for now, Sisa said, and it felt like watching herself commit a sin from the ceiling. Until this is resolved. Zola's face collapsed slowly. Sisa, he whispered, you can't be serious. I'm protecting Imani, she said, too quickly, too loudly. I'm protecting my daughter. Our daughter, Zola corrected, grief sharp in his voice. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He simply nodded once, absorbing the blow without giving her the satisfaction of seeing him fall apart. Fine, he said, voice rough, but I'm not disappearing from her life. And he didn't. Even after he moved back into his waterfall house next door, even after the estate WhatsApp groups buzzed with rumors, Zola still fetched Imani from school, still attended every concert, still stood at soccer practice on Saturdays, hands in pockets, cheering as if his heart wasn't being ripped open in public. He moved around Waterfall with pride, not arrogance, not performance, just refusal, as if he was telling the world, "You don't get to erase me with your mouths." Sisa watched him and felt her stomach twist, because Zola looked like an innocent man being hunted. Behind the scenes, he fought in a way Sisa didn't expect, not with PR, not with flashy denials, with truth. He contacted Interpol. Amadi wasn't just a jealous ex-friend. He was a wanted criminal across multiple jurisdictions, trafficking routes, laundering networks, intimidation, corporate takeovers used as camouflage. The kind of man who didn't just do crime, he managed it like an industry. And he had tried to force Zola to join him again. He wanted Zola to run the drug side too, to use African Life Botanicals as the front, because the business was now respected, clean, expanding into Europe. Perfect for laundering if you were evil enough. Zola refused. So Amadi punished him. He fed the rumors to blogs, paid sources, whispered into the right media pockets. He made sure the world believed the worst version of Zola. Weeks became months. The investigation dragged. The shame spread. And the worst part, worse than the headlines, worse than the cameras, was what it did to Imani. One afternoon, Imani came home too quiet. She ate her snack without smiling. When Sisa asked what was wrong, Imani's eyes filled. "Today a boy said my daddy is a bad man," she whispered. "He said my daddy sells drugs." Sisa felt a wave of rage, then shame so sharp it made her dizzy. In that moment, Sisa realized the truth she'd been avoiding. Her fear hadn't protected her daughter. It had exposed her. Sisa sat at her dining table that night long after Imani slept, staring at her phone. She saw a missed call from Zola from weeks ago. She hadn't called back. Pride had held her like chains. And now regret sat in her chest like a stone. Then suddenly, brutally, truth broke the way lies often do. Interpol arrests, coordinated raids, press releases, news anchors changing their tone overnight like shame had an off switch. Amadi was caught moving between jurisdictions. He was arrested, wanted in many places, dangerous enough that his capture became international news. And in the same breath, the world that had condemned Zola now praised him. Update: Zola Bengu cleared. Interpol confirms entrepreneur-aided investigation. Amadi arrested. African Life Botanicals vindicated. Sisa read the headline and didn't feel relief first. She felt grief, because none of it erased the moment she had doubted him. That night, she walked to Zola's house next door like someone approaching a sacred place she had vandalized. Zola opened the door and looked at her quietly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't triumphant. He was tired. "I'm sorry," Sisa choked before she could even step inside. "I'm so sorry. I doubted you. I let my fear, be louder than everything you've been to us." Zola didn't move. His eyes searched hers like he was looking for the woman who had finally chosen him and trying to understand why she vanished when he needed her most. "I thought you knew me," he said softly. "I do," Sisa sobbed. "I do. And that's what makes it unbearable. I can't apologize enough. I don't know how to fix it. But I'm here. I'm here to own it, to beg if I have to." Zola swallowed hard. His jaw tightened. Tears gathered slowly in his eyes, and the sight of them made Sisa feel like she was watching a strong tree finally bend. "You broke something, Sisa," he said, voice rough. "You broke the part of me that believed I was finally safe with someone." Sisa nodded violently, tears falling. "I know, and I hate myself for it." Silence pressed between them, thick with every breakfast he'd made, every bedtime story he'd read, every year he'd waited for her. Then Zola exhaled, slow and wounded. "But you're also the mother of my child," he said. "And I still love you. That's the problem, even when I shouldn't." Sisa's knees nearly gave out. She reached for him like a drowning woman reaching for shore. "I'm choosing you," she whispered. "Not the version the world tries to paint, not the version my fear creates. You, the real you. Please, let me earn back what I threw away." Zola closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, tears slipped down his face, silent, devastating. "For Imani," he said, voice breaking. "And because I can't pretend I don't want you." Sisa nodded, trembling. "For Imani, for us, for the love I almost destroyed." Zola pulled her into his arms, and Sisa cried like a woman grieving her own mistake, crying not just because she was forgiven, but because she had finally understood exactly how close she had come to losing the only safe love she had ever known. They didn't pretend the scar wasn't there. In the weeks that followed, Sisa had to learn humility in a way her career had never demanded. She apologized again and again, not with speeches, but with daily truth, showing up, listening, letting Zola be heard without trying to talk him out of it. Some nights, Zola woke suddenly and sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark. "What are you thinking?" Sisa would whisper. "Just remembering what it felt like," he'd say quietly. "To be accused, to have people look at me like I was dirty, and then to come home and feel like you also weren't sure." Sisa would press her face into his back and cry silently. "I'm here," she'd whisper. "I'm here, I'm here." Gradually, the rhythm returned, not naive, not fragile, but stronger, truer. And Zola chose not to hide. He returned to his EU operations with his head held high. The frozen accounts were released. Shipments moved again. The partners who had turned cold came back with apologies dressed as concerns. Zola accepted what served the business and ignored what served ego. At home, he remained Zola Imani's father first. Imani watched him one evening on television, giving a calm interview about integrity, about refusing to be used, about building something clean even when crime offered shortcuts. She looked up at Sisa and said, "Daddy is brave." Sisa's eyes stung. "Yes, my love, he is." And if you're listening to this story and you feel your heart pulling, if you love stories where women heal, where love is tested, where people grow through fire, make sure you subscribe to the Lerato Story channel so you don't miss the next story. Life moved forward again, and then quietly, unexpectedly, Sisa's parents arrived at Imani's birthday. Sisa opened the door and saw her father standing there, older than she remembered, his eyes softer, with something that looked like regret. "We've missed too much," Bongani said quietly. "We've been wrong. Can we come in?" Sisa's breath caught. She glanced at Zola, who squeezed her hand gently, leaving the decision to her. Sisa stepped aside. "Come meet your granddaughter." Watching Bongani interact with Imani, watching the tenderness he had never given Sisa as a child, hurt in a way Sisa didn't expect. It was like touching an old bruise you'd convinced yourself was healed. But Zola's hand remained in hers like an anchor. Nomusa hovered in the background, eyes glistening. She looked at Sisa with shame that felt like an apology without words. They sat in Sisa's home like guests in a life they hadn't helped build. Bongani avoided Zola at first, speaking around him, looking past him, as if acknowledging him would require admitting how wrong he'd been about everything. But Zola, as always, showed up with dignity. He offered tea, he listened, he smiled at Imani's jokes. He didn't demand respect, he simply existed in it. Later, Bongani pulled Sisa aside. "I heard about the accusations," he said quietly. "People were talking." Sisa's body went cold. "Yes, Baba, people were talking, and I almost believed them too." Her father's eyes widened. "You did?" Sisa didn't flinch from truth. "I doubted him. I was afraid of shame, and I hurt the man who has been more of a partner and father than anyone expected." Bongani's shoulders sagged, pride cracking just enough for honesty to slip through. "He is a good father," Bongani admitted, as if the words cost him. "Yes," Sisa said, voice soft. "He is, and he's good to me too, even when I didn't deserve it." Bongani exhaled slowly. "We made you carry too much," he whispered. "We wanted you to fit our picture. We didn't see you." Sisa's throat tightened. She had dreamed of those words her whole life. Now that they arrived, they didn't heal everything, but they opened a door. "I'm not asking you to rewrite the past," Sisa said gently. "I'm asking you not to ruin the present." Bongani nodded once. "I will try." That evening, after the party ended and Imani fell asleep, Sisa and Zola stood on the balcony again, city lights glittering below like 1,000 promises. "Are you okay?" Zola asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I am," Sisa said truthfully.
Then she added the part that mattered. "It hurt, seeing him with her. Seeing the grandfather he can be when he was never that father to me. But I have everything I need right here." "You have more than you need," Zola whispered. "You have everything you've always deserved." Sisa tilted her face up to kiss him, this man who had walked beside her through years of fear, through scandal and vindication, through the worst version of herself, and still chose love. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. "For what?" "For waiting," she said. "For showing up. For teaching me I was worth loving. And for forgiving me when I forgot how to love you properly." Zola's eyes softened, and he pulled her close. "Sisa, you've always been worth loving. I'm just grateful you finally believed it." They stood there as the city flickered beneath them, two people who had been wounded by the families that should have protected them, now whole inside the family they created. A daughter who would never doubt she was loved. A partnership built on respect, growth, and hard-won trust. And for the first time in her life, Sisa Ntetwa, brilliant strategist, global connector, devoted mother, allowed herself to be held without fear. She had finally come home.